Based on our experience, we had quite a bit of traction with three different kind of yield-bearing assets. The first being LSDs. Here, the examples that we're talking about includes STETH, RETH, and also assets like ETHX, for example. The second group of assets that has done quite well on Pendle are perps. So examples include GLP from GMX and also HLP from HMX as well. And the last group is something that we have been quite pushing on. We have been pushing quite heavily for the past few weeks, and that's RW assets. And to be more specific, yield-bearing stablecoins. So I think a month ago we have listed FUSDC from Flux and also SDI from Spark Protocol. In terms of strategy wise, if you are someone that's looking for a fixed yield, you would then purchase the PT STETH. And if you're someone that wants to trade the yield, so you have a view of whether the STETH yield will go up or go down, then perhaps the YT STETH is something that you'll buy or sell according to what you predict the market to be. And
Okay,
that's just the basic. We were able to ride on the initial LSD wave, and since then we were able to solidify or allow Pendle to be recognized as one of the central protocol within the LSD-Fi ecosystem. Of course, the idea of tokenizing yield-bearing assets has been there since the beginning of Pendle, right? Which is probably 2 years ago, right? We launched in 2021. However, it really only got significant traction when LSDs kind of kicked off, and we positioned ourselves right in the middle of that. And again, going back to what was said before, right? I think Pendle does best when we build on top of the success of the other protocols, right? And in this case, as the LSDs gets more traction, people start to think about how to maximize that yield, and that's when they start to realize that, you know what, you could it's worth looking into a protocol like Pendle.
welcome to episode 12 of Into the Forest with Pine. Today I'm with EY from Pendle. How about we start off with you introducing yourself, EY, and tell us a little bit about what you do?
At Y from the Pendle's BD team. And so a bit of background of myself. I've been in crypto for a few years now. Joined crypto full time early last year, and I've been with Pendle since earlier this year. So yeah, looking after partnerships, speaking to DAOs, integrations in terms of expanding our PTYT's integration across the DeFi ecosystem, and also speaking to people like yourself, right, to help to propagate and explain more about what we at Pendle does.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for coming on. So, one thing was interested in is like, how do you guys choose what assets to kind of put onto Pendle, and like what kind of meets like how do assets meet the criteria that you guys want to have on there for yield bearing assets?
For sure. Yep. So a bit of context at Pendle, we're able to tokenize any form of yield-bearing assets. As long as they're yield-bearing, we could technically list them on Pendle. However, having said that, we are quite selective when it comes to choosing which kind of assets to list, right? Based on our experience, we had quite a bit of traction with three different kind of yield-bearing assets. The first being LSDs. Here, the examples that we're talking about includes STETH, RETH, and also assets like ETHX, for example. The second group of assets that has done quite well on Pendle are perps. So examples include GLP from GMX and also HLP from HMX as well. And the last group is something that we have been quite pushing on. We have been pushing quite heavily for the past few weeks, and that's RW assets. And to be more specific, yield-bearing stablecoins. So I think a month ago we have listed FUSDC from Flux and also SDI from Spark Protocol. So in terms of so those are what we've listed, right? So in terms of how we select these assets, typically we look at of course ideally we want to look for assets that fits into either of these three categories, and beyond that we are looking for assets that have demonstrated quite a good traction, right, in terms of amassing liquidity and also getting traction across the wider DeFi community. More importantly, we also look at the yield that's being accrued by these assets. Typically, what we like to do is if it's a new asset that's just been listed, we'd observe for a couple of months before we decide to list on Pendle. And that's because, again, for Pendle, we are a yield market, right? So the yield trading activities on Pendle will only be vibrant if the underlying asset itself has a good traction.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So on Pendle, you guys split up assets into principal tokens and yield tokens. When people are buying principal tokens and yield tokens, what opinions are they trying to express, and why would they buy these tokens over the normal LSTs or yield-bearing stablecoins?
For sure, I think that's an excellent question, right? So, a bit of context, like you mentioned, what Pendle does is that we tokenize yield-bearing assets. So we split the tokens into the principal token component, which represents the underlying principal token, and the yield token, which is what we call YT. Basically, that what that represents is the yield from the underlying asset itself. So let's take an example, right? Let's say we are looking at STETH. So on Pendle, you're able to buy PT STETH, which is traded at a discount, right? Because PTSTETH itself will be redeemable into STETH at maturity at a one-to-one rate. On the other hand, you also have YT-STETH, which basically means that by holding one YT-STETH, you are accruing all the yield from the underlying STETH, right? So in terms of strategy-wise, if you're someone that's looking for a fixed yield, you would then purchase the PT-STETH. And if you're someone that wants to trade the yield, so you have a view of whether the STETH yield will go up or go down, then perhaps the YT STETH is something that you'll buy or sell according to what you predict the market to be. And
Okay,
that's that's just the basic, right? To go beyond that, you can get into a lot of different complex strategies involving leveraging. For example, some of our PT assets, PTSD, for example, can be used as collateral in some of the money markets. So there are some users that chooses to loop their positions to maximize their capital efficiency. And on the other hand, on the YT side as well, it allows you to have a greater capital efficiency as you are able to get access to a much higher yield with just a small amount of capital. And similarly, you could also do like hedging on other platforms if you want to go for a delta neutral strategy.
what have been the most popular other DeFi apps that these assets have been used as collateral in, or used as liquidity positions in?
There are a couple on Arbitrum, Dolomite, TimeSwap are the two protocols that comes to my mind. And we are also speaking to quite a few different ones. I think recently Stellar has also just launched a kind of like a looping leverage position for Rep STETH on our platform. So on Stellar, you could actually go up to 10 times leverage if you choose to do so. So these are the integrations that's happening, and of course, we're also speaking to some of the CDP protocols. It's very interesting, right? They could even accept our PTs and in some cases our LP positions as collateral in their CDP platforms for you to mint their stable coins.
That's interesting. Oh, okay. So, one thing that really stood out to me is over 2023, Pendle's TVL has been growing like pretty quickly, while the rest of the DeFi ecosystem as a whole has kind of been suffering liquidity outflows. What do you think's been like accounting for this growth in TVL and Pendle, where like opposed to the rest of the ecosystem?
I think a lot of people would attribute to the fact that we were able to ride on the initial LSD wave, and since then we were able to solidify or allow Pendle to be recognized as one of the central protocol within the LSD-fi ecosystem. Of course, the idea of tokenizing yield-bearing assets has been there since the beginning of Pendle, right? Which is probably 2 years ago, right? We launched in 2021. However, it really only got significant traction when LSDs kind of like kicked off, and we positioned ourselves right in the middle of that. And again, going back to what was said before, right? I think Pendle does best when we build on top of the success of the other protocols, right? And in this case, as the LSDs gets more traction, people start to think about how to maximize that yield, and that's when they start to realize that you know what, you could it's worth looking into a protocol like Pendle, where you can do yield trading on top of what you have in terms of the underlying LSD itself, and that can get you more yield and get you more essentially increase your capital efficiency and achieve the financial aims that you want to.
Oh, okay. So you were talking about how one of the like large sectors that's kind of coming up is real world assets. What do you kind of see for the upcoming like short term future and maybe longer term future of yield bearing assets on chain from the view of Pendle?
Yeah, I think real asset is another sector that we have been focusing quite a bit. Just a bit of context, since launching the two yield-bearing stablecoins, SDAI and FUSDC a month ago, it's actually currently it's contributing almost, I think, 25% of our TVL. So a significant chunk of growth came from the real assets. And it's something that we are keeping our eyes quite closely on. I think in the short term, we do see that there will be more and more uh, protocol that will come up that focuses on tokenizing treasury bills, right? I think US treasury bills has been the success so far, and we think a lot of protocols will try to emulate that. Not necessarily just focusing on US, but also in some cases we're talking about EU bonds as well. So that is in the short term. However, we have also quite a number of protocols that have approached us. There are protocols that's working in the RWA segment, but they have gone beyond the tokenized treasury bills. That we are looking at real estates. We are talking about valuable art pieces. In some cases, we're talking about carbon credits, right? Tokenizing carbon credits on chain. So we think that definitely for RWA, there is a significant room for growth, right? Right now, we're kind of like scratching the surface with tokenized US Treasury bills because that's simply seen as the risk-free yield, and not only that, it's highly liquid, right? But as the industry matures, we will definitely see more and more different subcategories within the RWAs that's upcoming. And at Pendle, our job is to identify which assets are the ones that has gained significant traction and which assets are the ones that our users would like to trade yield. Then we will list them on Pendle.
Yeah. So I was looking through like the chains that you guys are active on, and it seems like you guys are active on almost all the EVM chains that like have a lot of activity. And one chain that's been like really popular as of recently is the Coinbase base chain. Have you guys thought about kind of expanding operations to the base chain, or has that been anything that you guys been thinking about?
Yeah, something that we've been thinking about. But as of now, there isn't like a concrete decision made yet. The I mean, the goal is always for us to expand into chains that has significant traction in the three categories that I mentioned, right? LSDs,
Yeah.
RWAs, and also perps. It's sometimes what we found based on our experience is that if you're too early into the ecosystem, then the traction might be quite slow. Again, because the underlying kind of like a building blocks are still not there yet, and the ecosystem is still not ready for a yield trading protocol, which I must say it's considered a niche kind of like market and something that's more sophisticated, right? So base is definitely on our radar. Not only that, I think there are a couple of other L2s as well that we're looking at quite closely. To us, it's about managing the resource on one hand, given the limited resource that we have, and also trying to identify which are the protocols that we think that will be getting a lot of hype, attention, liquidity, and then that's when we decide to do it. That's when we'll decide to move into those areas.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So for the liquid staking tokens, has it seemed like you guys have like has it like slowed down in the amount of liquid staking tokens kind of growth on the platform, or do you think there's a lot more room to grow within that space?
Definitely a lot more room to grow. Just last week, we have launched ETHX from Stadder, another LSD asset. And within the short span of, I think, 2 weeks, we currently have, I think, if I'm not mistaken, around 4 to 5 million TBL, right? Just within 2 weeks. And of course, the context here is that the overall DeFi market is still quite, in terms of activities, is still quite low. And we are still on top of that, right? On top of Status, ETX, there are still other LSDs that's upcoming in terms of in our pipeline, and we do think that the similar to RWA, of course, the LSD ecosystem is slightly more advanced compared to RWA, but the whole ecosystem is still yet to take shape, right? Right now, its staking, I think, is still around 20%. It's still a huge room to grow. We have subcategories coming up, such as CDPs, right, where you accept LSDs as collateral. talking about some examples here include Prisma and Libra, for example. And those are kind of just getting started. And on the other hand, you also have things like restaking, right, from EigenLayer. Also, another subcategory that is just about to be kickstarted. So all of these different components are still in the early stages and are yet to mature. And I think as long as we continue to stay focused in terms of what we support, we'll be able to maximize our growth just on LSD itself. So I definitely think there's still a huge room to grow in the LSD sector.
So, what have you seen as been like the most popular like use case? Because you've explained like there's a bunch of different use cases for like a stable yield or a more variable yield. What has been like kind of the most popular use case among the users of your platform, and like what have you seen be the most demand for?
For sure. Um, if you're asking in terms of assets, then I would say STETH and JLP has been the most actively traded assets on the platform. Right, there's those types of assets. In terms of strategy, the most activity that what we see from our users are actually to LP into all these different pools, because one of the key differentiator of LPing on Pendle is that we have close to zero or minimal impermanent loss. And the reason for that is because of the nature of the composition of our pool, right? Which is the underlying asset and the principal token of the underlying asset. And because these two assets are highly correlated in terms of price, you there is a really low kind of impermanent loss when you LP into Pendle. So based on the study that we have done by looking into the data for the past 3 months of trading activity on Pendle, what we found was that in the worst case, right? Imagine if you LP in at the wrong time, at the worst possible time, and you withdraw your liquidity LP position at the worst time, you're looking at an IL of only 0.85%. So it's really I would say quite insignificant, right? And that's the worst position. So a lot of time, what we see for first-time users of Pendle, they come in, they will LP into the selected pool, whether it's LSD pool or whether it's a kind of like RWA pool, and from there they're able to enjoy 4 different sources of yield. Um, if I can explain the 4 different sources of yield, right? The first source is from the underlying yield, underlying asset itself, and
Yeah.
then you have the PT component, which is the fixed yield, and then you have the swap fees that's coming from the trading of the PTs and YTs from the pool itself. And lastly, you have the pendulum incentives. So again, if you think back about what I just said just now, whereby in the worst case, the IL is 0.85%, that is not including any pendulum incentives yet, right? So once you throw in the pendulum incentives, essentially you're looking at a positive, you'll definitely kind of like have a positive yield for your LP positions. So that to us, usually for first time users, we'll try to push them to LP. And moving beyond that, then once they get used to the Pendle ecosystem, once they understand how the mechanics works, then we'll start to push them towards exploring PTs, fixed yield. And for the more sophisticated users, of course, the trading of the YT tokens, which is the yield tokens.
Okay. How do you guys generate revenue as a protocol? Like what fees do you take and stuff like that?
Through swap fees. So any time so essentially when you buy and sell the principal token and the yield token from our AMM, we charge a small fee there, and that fee currently goes to our VE Pendle token holders, right? So as of now, that's the arrangement. Of course, in the future, we could take a percentage of that for the protocol.
Okay, that makes sense. So it seems like your protocol's touching all sorts of different protocols, from the yield-bearing assets to the DeFi protocols that like are leveraged on top of them. Like kind of outside of Pendle itself, like what things are you kind of most excited for in like the greater ecosystem?
Wow. I mean, personally, I would say one of the most exciting for me, it's kind of related to Pendle as well. It would be to tokenize borrowing position. I think that's something that's quite interesting for me personally, right? And if I can explain a bit more, in a lot of sense, I think going back to why Pendle was founded in the first place by our founders, right? I think the original vision is that we want to provide fixed yield, yeah, for the DeFi ecosystem, and we want to bring we want to be able to bring the TradeFi's interest rate swaps into the DeFi ecosystem, right? And if you look at TradeFi's interest rate swaps market, a lot of it comes from swapping of your borrowing position, right? So, for example, if a company A borrows at a fixed through a fixed kind of like borrowing position, and they would rather go on a variable position, then they swap that with a counterparty. So that itself is not yet viable on Pendle for various technical reasons. I'm not going to go into the details yet, but I would think that if we can crack that and we could go into tokenized borrowing position, that would be something that's quite useful, not only for Pendle, but also for the DeFi ecosystem as a whole.
I think this is a great way to end things. Thank you for coming on to Into the Forest with Pine.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jack.